Welcome to this brief guide to our solution to one of the most common problems in strategy, and that is to effectively and efficiently turn an idea into value. Now, I wanted to start with a quote from Adam Smith, the 18th century Scottish economist, and he said that science is the great antidote to the poison of enthusiasm and superstition. It remains a powerful thought some 250 years later because it describes what still happens in organizations to this day. Now, someone has an idea and they fall in love with it. They want it to happen as soon as possible and they can't wait. They don't know if it's the right idea, but they don't want to be slowed down either. They just want to get it done. Now, that's enthusiasm. Now, on the other hand, there are those who hear an idea and say, that will never work here, or that sounds way too risky. And they're scared of new ideas. It's a bit like being scared of the dark. You don't know what monsters lurk within. Now, nothing gets done, and regardless of the potential value of an idea, nothing changes. Now, that's superstition. Science is equally effective in helping you navigate past both those points. Now, the good thing is that this process is simple. First, you make sure that your idea aligns to the strategic priorities of the business. And in that way, you know you're working towards an outcome that contributes to something meaningful and valuable. Then you place bets, acknowledging that your idea, at this stage at least, is still full of assumptions and unknowns that need to be proven out. And then finally, you measure your progress by taking regular, leading, attributable metrics and then sharing them with others. And that way, evidence, rather than superstition or enthusiasm, is your guide. Now, overall, this is the process, and we call it the continuous evolution cycle. Now, explaining this model in detail is beyond our purpose for today, but for now, it's worth discussing the three components. So reading left to right, you start with the explore stage, where you incubate new ideas until they're ready to be drawn across into the second stage, which we call enhance. Now here, ideas are developed beyond their initial stages and tested to see if they can operate effectively at scale. And finally, the third phase on the right is evolve, where ideas are run and incrementally improved at scale, with measurable results delivered at least every 90 days. Now, whilst all the pieces matter, and they're all interconnected and interrelated, we're going to focus on the first stage today. So step one is about ensuring your idea is aligned to the strategic priorities of the business. Now, typically, we start this process by running an OKR session with clients. And in that way, we gather from across the organization the key goals and outcomes they're aiming for, as well as how progress will be measured. And once we have this information, we can visualize that as a roadmap radar, and that's what you see on the screen here. Now, a roadmap radar is a simple model, and it shows how efforts over time align to the strategic goals of the organization. And the radar is useful for a number of reasons, including it helps create a dynamic portfolio of prioritized bets, which helps the organization decide where to go next with confidence. It provides teams with a greater sense of purpose and meaning, and it ensures effective resource allocation, because once you've taken out the misaligned activities from the backlog, you can concentrate on what really is delivering value. Now, let's talk about how to create one. You start with the goals. So they're the items around the outside, and they define the colored sections of the radar. And there are typically around 4 to 5 of them. They are the long-lived North Stars of the organization, capturing both its purpose and its values. The goals change infrequently unless the company decides to radically diversify. For example, if Nike decided to open up a chain of coffee shops. Goals can create creative friction between one another, such as between the goals of being ethical and being profitable, but they should never contradict one another. That is to say, there are plenty of ways to be ethically unprofitable or unethically profitable, and in those instances, an open and honest conversation is required to resolve that conflict. Now, the outcomes, so the numbers around the outside of the radar, are the strategic priorities that align to those goals. They're aspirational, and they describe the desired future state. For example, acquire new customers or be number one for customer satisfaction. They are the pizza slices of the roadmap radar, and they're divided into quarterly time horizons to reflect that 90-day cycle. Then lastly, there are the bets, the olives on the pizza. These pyramids represent a time-bound experiment designed to explore the attributable impacts of an intervention. Now, with carefully controlled variables and progress measured by leading metrics, bets maximize learning whilst minimizing risk. And the optimal approach here is one bet per team per 90-day cycle. Now, at a glance, the other thing about the roadmap radar is that it allows you to see clusters or gaps in effort per quarter. Now, here you can see in goals 1 and 2 that they have a concentration of bets in the first quarter, whereas goals 3 and 4 on the left have relatively few. Now, that indicates there might be an imbalance in the portfolio. And again, an open and constructive conversation needs to happen about priorities and effort. Next step. What do we mean when we say place bets? Well, first, it's important to note that when we use the word bet, the language is intentional. And it encourages decision makers to confront how much they're willing to invest in the stated outcome in terms of people, time, and budget that could be spent elsewhere. It relies on the design of a structured experiment that creates feedback loops, validates the value of an idea, and reports on progress towards specific leading metrics. Bets are scoped to deliver measurable and attributable progress within 90 days. And when we say experiment, we don't mean try some stuff. We mean design an experiment that control the variables. You want to consider leading measures that can be attributed to your specific intervention. This isn't chucking stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. This is lab coats and Petri dishes and Bunsen burners. So how do you decide how big to go on a bet? I found this a useful way to guide my thinking, and it's an adaptation of the Constable's curve and describes the relationship between confidence and fidelity. Now, a quick note on language. Fidelity here doesn't necessarily mean gold-plated code. It's more about appearing real. And if one has high confidence in an idea, but is only willing to commit a small amount of effort or investment in bringing that into existence, then you're like the cowardly lion from the Wizard of Oz up there in the top left. Conversely, if you have low confidence in the value of an idea, but still want to commit huge amounts of effort and investment in making it as real as possible, then you're as brainless as the scarecrow down there in the bottom right. An example might be instructive here. Consider little Toto down there in the bottom left. Represents low confidence, low fidelity. Now, recently at a client, they wanted to add a new product offering to their online store, but to actually create it and sell it at scale would have meant a huge upfront investment and therefore risk. Instead, they offered the customer the ability to buy the item online, but those that clocked through and received a regretful message saying that the item in question was temporarily out of stock, and that they should consider alternatives which actually did exist in the real world. In this way, they're able to gather evidence of demand and therefore grow confidence in the value of their idea without risking too much time or money on something which was essentially still unknown. It was a clever idea, and I've often heard leaders express great frustration with the scientific method. They become convinced that their idea is the answer, the enthusiasm we talked about earlier. They don't want to spend time faffing around with hypotheses and experiments and the tedious rigors of the scientific method. However, those same leaders are typically unable to substantiate their confidence with evidence, and that can and will lead us down a bad path. It's up to us to design experiments that sit exactly on the right spot of the yellow brick road, matching confidence to fidelity to prove or disprove assumptions without disproportionate exposure to risk. The best tool for the job is the bet canvas, and this is what you're seeing on screen now. This outlines how experiments can be designed, measures of success defined, and any challenges and risks captured with direction guided by continuous feedback loops. Now, each bet canvas includes a time-bound experiment with a plan for how evidence of the impact will be gathered and analysed. The progress of each bet should be reported regularly, at least weekly. And here, to illustrate this, we have a pizza brand who wants to explore the reputational upside of intervening in the recyclability of their takeaway pizza boxes, whilst making every effort not to dilute the profit margin of their franchise holders. And the idea being that in most councils, boxes spoiled with melted cheese or excessive oil cannot be recycled, and therefore adding a biodegradable paper insert to absorb the cheese and oil will ensure the box can be recycled. Now, how will this be measured? Well, by metrics such as net promoter score, sentiment on social media, and then on the profit side, the gross margin numbers reported back from the franchisees. Then you get into the experiment itself, designed to help optimize learning while minimizing risk. It's worth saying that the CEO of this company has done her sums and has concluded that adding 5p worth of investment into each pizza box across millions of pizza boxes adds up to an unacceptable level of extra cost. The experiment is then split up into 3 groups. For the first group, within certain agreed postcodes, nothing changes. So that's your control. Then for the second group, in another set of postcodes, the customer, when ordering either online, through the app, or on the phone, will be given the option of the insert at an extra price of 5 pence. Then the third group will automatically have the inserts included in the price of the pizza, which will be inclusive of this extra 5p. Now, running this experiment for a certain period of time, let's say 30 days, will give us evidence on which to base a decision to continue, to pivot, or to fold. Now, the last section is about measurement. Now, the bet canvas is covered with ideas for next best actions, and you see them here in the column on the left. But doing them all at once would make it impossible to reliably attribute cause and effect. Instead, you have to decide on what you'll do now, what you'll do next, and what you'll do later. And then designating primary responsibility allows everyone to know who to ask about what at any time. Now, each week, the person with primary responsibility, in this case, Paul, reports back on what he's discovered that week using this dashboard. Here, he's uncovered an awkward truth that's well worth knowing. In this case, this pizza company has no historic sentiment data through their Facebook or Instagram accounts. And that defines a next step, which is to create baselines for both of those channels against which Paul can then measure changes once the experiment is up and running. Now, you'll notice at the bottom of this dashboard, in the bottom half, is an explicit acknowledgement of the assumptions which underpin the thinking at that point in time. And the point here is to ensure that your efforts are aimed at gathering enough evidence to reliably say which of your assumptions have been proved right or wrong. And until you've emptied out the insufficient evidence column, you can't say whether you need to pivot or fold. And there you have it. How to use the scientific method to proceed quickly and reliably from idea to value. So thank you. If you have any comments or questions about this process, please drop me a line at my email address on the slide down there in the bottom right, and or visit our website at equalexperts.com/strategic advisory practice.